fast fashion, fast retail. He's got a lot of knowledge. So let's welcome to the stage.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Tim. So what we're going to talk about this morning is about data-led supply chain transformation. So our job as a consultant is changing organizations. So change management is what we do. But this time we're going to take a slightly different slant. We're going to look at it from the lens of data. So started off with some facts. Since it's a data-led transformation, we are actually producing more data in the last 2 years that we've had in the whole of the history of the human race. So there's a proliferation of data, some scary numbers, 40,000 searches per second on Google. 1.4 billion smartphones will be shipped out this year with some new technology that would enable us to capture a whole set of new data around us. Every minute on Facebook, there's 31 million messages. 1 minute on YouTube is 300 hours of videos. And last year, we had about 1 trillion photos taken, of which 1 billion of them were actually shared via the net. And very importantly, CBX has moved on to the cloud, which makes a lot of sense because the projection is to have about 30% of the data generated that will go through cloud solutions. So all of that are mind-gobbling sort of numbers. But the headlines in the newspapers are indicating that people accept that and they see data as a key strategic part of their transformation. So 76% of the chief sourcing officers will say that they see that as a key strategy. And then 48% of them would then say, yes, I've actually capitalized on benefits. But I think the reality is potentially quite far from that, right? This is nice headlines in the magazines. The reality is this, right? The reality is the majority of retailers and manufacturers are surrounded by data, but don't use really the data to optimize their supply chain. So what we're going to talk about this morning are three things. One, we're going to bring a little bit of context as to why data management is so important. So I will share a couple of case studies to put into context. Then we're going to talk about 3 tech trends that are leading 3 major revolutions of change within organizations. And finally, I want to bring a bit more pragmatism to those conferences. So I'm going to share kind of practical steps as to, once we've heard all of those good things, how do we implement it successfully into an organization? So starting with the context, the data management. First of all, we're all quite conscious of that right now. Our traditional operating model has reached its limits, right? So we all know that large production batch ordering doesn't work anymore. Purely negotiation based on volume have reached their limits as well. We're scrapping the barrel, purely negotiating on volume. Complex and slow IT transformations are clogging up our systems. Designing products purely from the perspective of product design is also is limiting our perspective on the market. And inevitably, silo internal ways of working are also preventing organizations to do great things. So altogether, those are the symptoms of sluggish and expensive supply chains. So let me take an example to start with. This is a large Hong Kong mass market apparel retailer. They are extremely conscious of their inventory, and therefore the CEO and CFO have set a target of 60 days of inventory. But they look at that at a very macro level across the organization. Now, they couldn't kind of figure out why their sales were dropping. So they were blaming the market is softening, mainland Chinese are not coming into Hong Kong, all sort of things. But no data, right? This is just like anecdotal. So the reality of it is we went in, we looked at the data, and what was very interesting is the more you dived into the data at granular level, the more you realize that they had a massive issue of availability in their stores. A number that they were not even measuring. So the reality is you can see this green line kind of falling off a cliff, right? This is a particular product, but it's very representative of a large part of their business. And the bar charts that you see here are actually an indication of the days of inventory. So there's a funny thing happening is because the days of inventory are actually going up. So the management would think, great, actually, maybe we overstocked, so stop buying. But if you look at the little dotted line, their store availability was dropping. And they have no idea. So what was going on? They simply had no visibility of size-color ratio by store clusters, right? So we're talking about a level of detail that matters. But decisions were made at the top to stop buying. We were buying too much. We reached our DOI target. Very, very dangerous decisions. I have data, but how to use the data and how granular you want your team to look at it makes a massive difference in your top line and in your bottom line. Moving on to another case studies, this time a European retailer. So in this case, and I think this is symptomatic of many retailers around the world right now. So that's why I've chosen this case. So what we see here is we had a trend where rolling items, so year-round products, were purchased at the exact same times as more seasonal or one-off products. So what does that tell you? It tells you that we're actually clogging up the manufacturer with products that could have been managed outside of this key critical period. So I would go and negotiate on price because I'm a good buyer. So I'm going to say, oh, I'm going to give you 20% more volume. And the suppliers were like, I don't want it. It's just going to add more complexity. I'm going to fail my OTD on time delivery. I'm going to have lots of OT. This is not going to work out for me. Just give me the same as last year, but spread it out. So the reality of that is the buyers were completely unaware of the impact of their actions. They were like, oh, that's easy. I need it in store for that day. So, I calculate it back, and this is when I need to order it in the warehouse, in the factory, right? So, again, data is available, conversations with suppliers were there, and, still working through the numbers. There's large opportunities in terms of air freight reduction, cut and make cost reduction, fabric buy reduction, enormous opportunities on the financial side. So much more opportunities to be had than actually going in with a pure perspective, oh, I'm going to give him 20% more volume this year. I'm going to get a great FOB price, right? Wrong perspective. So in reality, an agile supply chain is at the heart of a true EBIT gain strategy, right? Very simple numbers. If you are an agile supply chain, you should be there or thereabouts around an OTIF of 94% on time in full, and lead times around 85 days. This is kind of generic and it's apparel driven. But if I'm not within that, I would be more below the 90s, and I would have a lead time of about 100 days and beyond. Again, quite generic, but ballpark would be applicable to a number of products. Right? So taking the wrong decisions have a dramatic impact. Now, of course, if you ask the CEOs, oh, what do you think, what are the directions, so which of the following areas of technology will significantly impact your business in the next 2 years, right? And how much you're investing in it. So, of course, at the top, analytics and digital, right? But all of that, I think, is probably created out of hype, right? Media driving and influencing those surveys. But the reality of it, very few actually use this data. So what I'd like to talk about is 3 tech trends, and there are many. So this list is not really exhaustive, just 3 that I thought were quite interesting, and how those 3 trends are actually influencing and transitioning our supply chain. So the first trend is we see the ability these days to actually manage large scale of data, right? And just simply the power of PCs these days that we give our employees. Every year, the CPU capacity, the processing speed, increases by 25% every year. Boom, boom, boom. So it is significant how much our people can drive in terms of managing data out of a simple computer. But of course, what's really transforming everything is the cloud solutions. We, for instance, have sometimes to manage very complex data sets, 4,000 stores, 6,000 references, very complex daily inventory level, so huge, enormous data sets, right? So to do that, we wouldn't do that out of a computer of the 1980s. Right? We do that on a cloud-based solution. We have a huge server that computes all of this data for us. Otherwise, it's just impossible. But now we can do that very easily. We can process thousands of combinations overnight and then go back with very insightful details to our clients. But for retailers and brands, what that means is you can start entering another level of service-driven strategy, which is mass personalization. So I'll come back on that later on. The other part is the complete transformation in terms of barcode and connected devices. Right? So right now, they estimate about 2 billion connected devices around us, with a huge CAGR, growth rate, of about 40% to 2020, taking us around 20 billion, some people say 50 billion, the more optimistic, somewhere along that. Enormous amount of connected devices will be around us. Some will be on us. Some will be within our place of work. So we'll talk about that a bit later as well. And the last trend is the revolution of industrial machines. So I know you guys come from different trades within the retail world, but we also work with a variety of industries, and I can tell you that the level of innovation which is in factories, whether it's amazing laser cutting machines or 3D printing technologies, all of that, if developed well and positioned in the right place, can have dramatic impact on the supply chain. And for our angle, we really would focus on the reduction of waste. So when we talk about waste, it's industrial waste, right? It's, for instance, cycle time waste. It's a WIP in a factory. We're talking this type of waste. So now we're going to deep dive a little bit. So the first one, mass personalization. So actually here there's two elements to it. There's an element of mass personalization from the perspective of goods of consumption, and the other part in terms of services, right? So kind of different angles. So the first one is, we're all very familiar with that, the size blocks. This is kind of the holy grail of many retailers getting the right size, having the suppliers using the right blocks. But in reality, that creates a lot of issues. It creates a lot of issues in terms of size variation. We have a lot of issues in terms of MOQs because we're stuck to those quantities we have to purchase. And the return and loss rates can be very high if you get that wrong. If the fit is wrong, and you may have the right bell-shaped curve on your distribution of orders, if the fit is wrong, that goes back into the warehouse. So what we see, though, is a migration towards mass personalization. And with that, there are different tiers to it. You can go for the absolute extreme of mass tailoring, and I'll talk to that in a minute. Or you could go into kind of the part, the in-between road, which is the mass personalization, offering a variety of selections to customers. That has been around for a long time, so it's not new, right? The Nike shoes and the Converse shoes have been around for a long time, but the degree at which manufacturers and retailers are starting to invest into this and see that as a strategic differentiating factor, I think is starting to pick up a lot of momentum. And what we see is people are actually thinking that there is a direct impact on the assortment planning. Do I really need to have such a wide assortment in my stores if I offer mass personalization at record speed of delivery? Right? And I think the whole concept of inventory management is being spun on its head right now. And there's a lot of opportunities, I think, for retailers and brands to operate very lean supply chains end to end. Now, what we see, though, is there's pretty 3 stages of an evolution of a retailer. Stage 1 is a traditional large-scale batch production, probably without picking on anyone in particular, but Gap would fall potentially into those kind of section. Then you have the more frequent fast fashion-driven. Zara will fall into that, right? So people have a feel that I'm going to buy this particular collection and it will change tomorrow. So you're moving a little bit more towards something that is unique. And then you have new brands like J. Hilburn, and that's completely based on personalization. right? So you could actually customize the thread of your shirt, the color of your button, the shape of your collar to your preferences. But to do that, it's not that easy. It requires a lot of rethinking around the entire supply chain. How do I collect sizes? How do I collect customer preferences? So we see a lot of evolution around the 3D scanning. You will see a lot more of that around you, I think, in the next 5 to 10 years. Australia, for instance, is leading the way where Westfield department stores are putting scanners at the disposal of people, so they can get scanned, and then they get recommendations as to what could be their best selection of clothes within their retail stores. Requires a very careful management of raw material, and more importantly, you can't expect your manufacturers to pick that up very quickly, because the practices of line and production management require very advanced level of flexibility that very few would have. So they would need a time for them to adjust to those changes. What we see, though, is also the personalization of shopping conditions. So what was very interesting is probably at the beginning a catalog was already a great opportunity for people to start to choose from their homes. Then we become a little bit smarter. We say, well, it's a big catalog. Maybe I can fine-tune that. Direct mailing was a great thing, trying to understand the customer. Then we became a bit more savvy. We had those big CRM programs, right? In the 1990s and 2000s, CRM was everywhere. Do you have a CRM system, that was a big buzz. And then we became a lot smarter with that, loyalty cards and so on and so forth. Then we're starting to move towards more digital platforms that are starting to take over. They own data. Once you have data, you understand customer preferences. If you understand customer preferences in this world, that means a lot. It means a lot to the point where even Amazon coming up with Echo, right, which is a device that people would have in their homes, and they can just order as and when things run out. I want a pint of milk, and that's it. Bang, place the order. That database of information is gold. And with that information, if it's rightly used, you can dramatically influence how you forecast, how you replenish, how you place orders, how you minimize your risk on buys. Everything will be driven towards that data management. So without going into a lot of detail, there's a typical life cycles of inventory management where you start forecasting, then you sense the demand, then you work very closely with your suppliers for this tight period, and then you do demand shaping. So if you think about that, and we take an example of the Dell case study. So I don't know if you're aware of that, but it's a classic because it's so well thought through. So you want to buy Dell online, so you go and you look at your favorite laptop. It's not available for a variety of reasons. What Dell does, it would actually understand your preferences. It would understand your journey, and it would actually offer you the next best thing. So they're trying to capitalize on the fact that you may not be able to buy from us right now that particular product, but it could be something that would be as good as, and you may be either upselling or potentially downselling, but you're not losing that sale. And that concept of the Dell case study is very powerful in terms of demand shaping. How do you drive, for instance, products that did not sell well in the past season without discounting them heavily? How do you influence the customer journey towards bundling things and buying together and growing your shopping basket? Those are demand shaping techniques, and you can only do that if you know how to capture your data and then how to leverage your data to do smarter things than just discounting heavily on your website. Moving on quickly, conscious of time, the linkage of supply chain. So we just mentioned enormous amount of devices are coming into our lives. All big brands are coming to it. I think there's a huge expectation from the city that if you do not invest in new technologies, your value on the stock market will potentially be impacted. Tesla, as I did, Fossil's doing acquisition. Apple is developing new apps. And if you really look around the CAGR growth across different segments of our economy, the consumer segment is by far the fastest growth that we will be experiencing in the coming years. So I just want to show you a couple of examples of how the entire supply chain, from raw material all the way out to your place of consumption, is actually becoming integrated with data. So you have organizations that actually put their whole value proposition on a strategy angle on the fact that they have a traceable raw material strategy. So in the event of a crisis, in terms of suppliers in Japan, there's an earthquake, or whatever type of crisis, they have the ability to redirect the sourcing of their products at record speed and ensure there is no disruption in the production of their products. They sell smartphones. The manufacturers, we talked a lot about RFID, is it going to work, not work? This was the big talks of the 2000s. They're all around us. Difficult to imagine a factory these days that doesn't control WIP, between stages of production without some sort of sensors that these days are highly affordable, and Fossil is one of those examples. On the finished goods, I think smart tagging is becoming widely spread, whether you're in the perishable business or whether you're in a business of hard goods, soft goods. The tagging system is becoming incredible. You have smart tags that have very short lives but very long ranges of data transmission, or you have the reverse. You have very short range data transmission but very long lifespan. So don't have enough time right now to show the implications, but there's a lot of technology that you can apply to your products that would allow you to trace and understand better how your product moves through the supply chain, where are the bottlenecks, where do we go wrong, and how do we fix it. Inbound logistics, this is mainly about cloud services. Before it was very expensive to buy the right software. These days you have a lot more flexibility in using cloud solutions. You have now retailers like Bonobos in the United States that sell online. They have fit shops, but they don't carry any stock. You can touch and feel in their flagship store, so you can have a sense for the fabric, but you can't buy there. You go online and you purchase. So you have virtually no inventory retailing. Last mile logistics with a Hubber Rush that allows people to conduct their own delivery. So I could be a courier tomorrow right after this conference. I get an order on my smartphone and I carry this water to the guy down the road and I get a fee out of it. So everybody can become a DHL. Right? Very smart concept. And more manufacturers like Samsung and other brands are actually now getting directly in contact with the with the client, with the customer. Right? I open my fridge, all the sensors inside the fridge to tell me whether my pint of milk needs replacing. That data will be given to the manufacturers. So imagine the power that the manufacturers will have as they deploy those technologies. Well, how do you use it? So here is a great case study. It's the case study of Tesco, the British retailer. This is the screenshot of their Tesco Connect, which is a web portal for vendors, for their food business. But I think it's so brilliant that I'd like to use this as a case study, how to use data and share it. Because if it's not shared, the data is useless, right? So the first part that I find brilliant is they're actually showing clear visibility of the upfront incoming orders in the coming days. This is perishable food. You can apply that to longer lead time. They also then show the prioritization. Well, if you can't make that, please make sure the carrots from Spain will be delivered over the tomatoes from Brazil. And the last one, they indicate incoming promotions. So promotions are always the big factor that will create demand variability, right? So here they're actually telling them, hey, by the way, just to let you know, in 2 weeks, the red carrots, from Spain, or the carrots from Spain, rather, will be on promotion. There will be a halo effect on your orders. So having the data is great, but keeping it to yourself is just going to do us any good. So how do we share it in a smart way is a good example of how Tesco does that. And the reduction of waste, so we spoke about that. I'm going to focus a little bit on lead time. If you go into factories and you see things like that, you probably think that you may have your product at low cost, but at the end, this company is not going to be in business very long. And what we see is a complete transformation of our factories. So I don't want to go into the cliche of Industry 4.0 because we nearly overheard it as well. But there is indeed a revolution of the factories where data is being used to drive decision making. And I think the important part and the more pragmatic part is a case study we're working on with a client who is in the bra business, manufacturing, and they have about 20 days of WIP, and their target is 7 days. But they have no ideas as to where the buildup of fabric is. They can visually see it. They can't monitor it. There's no sufficient data. The sample size is too small. So great integration of scan tickets techniques that have been incorporated into production planning softwares, so we can more dynamically reallocate the resources and prioritize the orders. All of that will be further enhanced by some RFID technology that they look into place in more complex part of their factory. So this is very important. Data is becoming available, but what drives data is the decision making. And unfortunately, if you look around you, a quotation from McKinsey are telling us that 99% of the data is actually disregarded before the decision maker have a chance to use it. And I'm sure this applies to most of us in this room. So how do we move from theory to practice? Is a big topic. There are 3 things that we find around our clients that typically are roadblocks to change. First, they make that an IT-led project. So the challenge with that is that they are completely disconnecting themselves from the decision maker. Second, we have superficial organization change. Oh, I've got a data scientist. This is it. I must be doing something right. But again, similarly, we're not training the rest of the managers that are unskilled in data management and making the decisions. So you may have one good guy who can clean up the data, but how do you make decisions? The other part is around the quick wins are often disregarded. Big vision, we're going to do these big projects, going to be enormous, but actually we're losing the momentum. We're not capturing the quick wins. People get very quickly bored with it. It's too complex. It doesn't relate to my day-to-day job. So therefore, that fails. So in reality, most people will agree that skills is an issue. If you ask people around you, do you have the right skills in your team? The trend is no. But then if you ask them how much money are you spending on it, a growing trend is saying, well, I spend less than 1% of my budget. So you can buy the best technology, right? But in reality, if you don't train your people, no one's going to use it. So for us, when we talk about data management, it's really a mindset. It's a mindset of deciding at the top, we're going to make decisions based on facts. It's a cultural change, and it's a top-down transformation. So real quick, because I know we're running out of time, so I apologize for that. I make 5 minutes. Just very quick, a quick framework for you to take home. So the first one, as I said, is a vision, right? So you have to start with deciding amongst your peers at the top that decisions we made based on facts, not anecdotal, not like high level, trends of last year, whatever. It has to be at a level of detail that makes sense for us to make decisions. The second part is we have to understand that there are 2 blocks. There's a block of data that is within our organization. Start with your financials, go up into your operational data. And there's a part which is external, where you start with your vendors, and then once you control that, you go and be more smart at how you manage your customer data. But then you have to enable it. So you have to have a culture and a framework of cross-functional decision making. You have to train your managers to ensure they can use the data. How many of them around the room can really use Excel outside of a pivot table? Right? You can't do much with a pivot table when it comes to analytics. And IT strategy. You need an IT to really scale up the decision making, but that comes at the right moment in time in your transformation. Now, I'm just a bit conscious that my case study, the next one coming up, is a bit heavy, so I'm going to shorten it. If you have questions, we can go through it at the end. This is the case study of a company who, as an American watch, fashion, mass market retailer, huge volume across the world. They have operations in China. And the challenge was that the whole team were used to making decisions based on their experience, and very experienced people as well. But they were getting quite disconnected between what they looked on the P&L and what the operation was actually doing. They could not relate the two. The P&L is going down, but what's wrong in the operation? So we created a framework that enabled the client through smart reporting and dashboarding, to connect different layers of the organization. What are the decisions CEOs have to make? Let's scatter good data for them, simple to understand, to make decisions. What does the management team of the factory actually need to use to understand the decisions of tomorrow and more shorter-term actions? And the last one, what do the line managers have to understand? And the three connect together, so you can go down and then back up, so you have a clear continuity. So the idea was to ensure that we're migrating towards a cross-functional decision-making, which was not the case in the past. But very importantly, the team very quickly realized that they were potentially having misalignments on issues. So this meeting became very powerful as to understanding issue on the on-time in full of their suppliers. People will also have different understanding about the root cause of their over-inventory. But now that data became available, the conversations became much more factual and much more targeted in terms of the follow-ups. So we see a lot of changes, but change has to be accompanied by coaching and training, right? It's impossible to bring a new meeting, new way of looking at your business without coaching those people, right? They need to transition. So, it's important that we bring business modeling skills to the managers. The awareness is a big problem. Half of them will not know what it is that they're doing wrong. So building knowledge through simple games, adult learning, as we say, is very important to upgrade and refresh the decision-making of your managers. And then you have to coach them during meetings. How many meetings that we go to, there is no agenda, and how many meetings there is no decisions made at the end of that. And that cannot be part of this culture that a decision-driven, a fact-based decision-making driven company will want to drive. So I've exceeded my time, so I apologize for that. There was a lot of content. I'd be more than happy to share the deck with you, share some thoughts on this topic. But I think for me is, there's no better time but now to start. We have a lot of data in our hands. And I would say start small, start on something which is very targeted, and then just build around that, because that's where you will have the most impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred. We are running kind of late, so but I highly recommend you come up to speak with Fred. Fred has a lot of knowledge. Talk about your sourcing and supply chain, your production chain. He's got an answer for you. So please find him after the break, or during the break. Okay, our next speaker